Just a second.
Just notify us that she won't be able to make it. And hopefully allow us a little time to get Eileen and others back on the road a little earlier. How's everyone doing?
Great.
Good. Everybody
all.
Retirement.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a little jealous.
I've been more calm in the last 2 months than I've been in the last 15 years.
Wow. I need some of that.
Yeah. Maybe 45 years ago.
I've got kind of just a starting thing, I talked to each of you, and I got some feedback from people on live streaming, and I see Max got his laptop out, and that's just, let's minimize email traffic and stuff while you're in the meetings, and you've all been carefully selected for your personal attributes and knowledge, and let's try to work efficiently and contribute 100% or sit in the room. Take care of connecting with people outside of the meeting after the meeting. Another thing, I had a question for all of you, and that's the first meeting we had coffee here. I am happy to organize that if you guys would like that. I always wonder if people really want to drink coffee after 6 p.m. Anyone? Maybe I was the only one drinking coffee that day.
I've had it both times you had it.
Yeah, we'll drink it.
Okay.
A guy might do it on a night like tonight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, that's my fault. I would have brought it.
No,
if I
that's okay.
hadn't
No,
been-
fair
I
enough.
think you get a pass,
You know what?
Eileen, on anything today at all.
Eileen and I'll coordinate on that for the next meeting. I think what we'll do, Brian, while we're waiting, do you want to just kick off? I think it'd be a shame not to hear from Kristen directly, so I don't want to get in too much detail about this.
I can give a really brief
That'd be great.
overview.
Let's go ahead and do that now.
Sure. So Kristen Thrall, who is scheduled to present tonight, emailed. She's the recreation manager for the Drought National Forest in Michigan. And there's 2 rivers that are wild and scenic. They're the Pure Marquette and the Pine. And when a river is wild and scenic, it triggers, it requires a recreation plan. And so those 2 rivers have plans. And so I emailed in lieu of her not being able to present, we'll maybe try to get it later. This is the actual plan for Pure Marquette River. In a real brief synopsis, the way the plan works, it's also kind of nice because you can see the entire workflow of a recreation plan. They establish desired values, they establish capacities, there's management plans and how to set limitations, and then there's a recipe for follow-up. In a nutshell, the way the plan works in Michigan is they've carved out 3 separate user groups. One is commercial guide, which is guided fishing on the Pure Marquette. On the Pure Marquette, they did this a long time ago, so there's, I believe, a little over 20 fishing guides that are permitted, and then some guides are permitted to run 1 boat a day, and some guides are permitted to run more than 1 boat a day. So that's kind of how they have a limit and an allocation on guided fishing. And then there's a use group which is called livery service, and then on the Pure Marquette and the Pine, that's a rental or a canoe rental. And so you could call up the livery services have an allocation of how many canoes they can rent. And when you call the rental company, you get a boater pass with your rental. And then the third use group is the general public. And the way that is managed is there's watercraft passes. And they're reserved through recreation.gov. And there's an allocation of X number of passes. It's a little complicated. One of Chris's feedback when I talked to her was they probably made that a little too complicated. So for example, if you want to go at 1 person in a kayak, it's half a pass. 2 people in kayaks, 1 pass. Raft is 2 passes. You can reserve essentially 8 passes on 1 reservation. And it could be a couple different days, or it could be 1 day with like several boats. So in a nutshell, that is the plan that they utilize in Michigan.
Did the restrictions for the permits come before the plan? And they did the plan just incorporated
The plan when the rivers became wild and scenic, that triggered this process. In our shared drive is actually the guideline, the federal guidelines for establishing river recreation plans. So when a river becomes wild and scenic, which is an outside possibility for the Madison in the Testers, Headwaters Act.
Heritage Act.
There's a proposal to have the Madison, the Smith River, and several other waterways be following the wild and scenic.
And a portion of the Gallatin.
A portion of the Gallatin, East Rosebud, and a few others.
But then on the Pier Marquette, were the caps in place before the wild? Or is it?
I do not believe so. I believe the wild and scenic designation, and generally from a federal river recreation, that's a requirement. It usually needs to either be a national park or designate wild and scenic for them to go in and oversee that. But that's a trigger that wild and scenic would require is a review of that.
Right, Dan.
A couple of quick questions. One is, do you have a recollection or information on how long it took them to put that process together? And then the second question, if you could just give me a little bit of a sense of what the river corridor is like. Is it accessible primarily just by floating? Or is it what's?
There is waiting. They chose not to. They have a statement in the plan that gives them the option to allocate wade fishing at a later date, if that, but at the moment, that is not restricted. It is a day use river. The reason I thought it was worth evaluating it, there's lots of rivers that are permitted around the country, but because the Pier Marquette is basically a day use river, it's not a camping river. It's not. It's
more
flat out
similarity to
has
Madison.
more similar to Madison, so it was worth looking at.
Do you know how long it took them to go through that process?
I don't. The federal process is pretty rigorous. Like, I don't know if you had a chance to look at that. I mean, it's pretty lengthy. And Chris McGrath could ask me, see if he has any background knowledge on that. I would guess, I can check on that. They also went through a similar process. Shoots River. But in day use rivers, there's also some in Canada. There it's actually mostly wade fishing, where they have set limitations on beyond commercial. Commercial is very common, right? Commercial restrictions are very common, but rivers that have limitations on non-commercial, there's a.
Chris, Zach, welcome. Really delighted you're here. We didn't really start the meeting officially with, we just learned this afternoon that Kristen is going to present on the rivers in Michigan. So Brian was just kind of giving a quick overview of what she's going to talk about. Hopefully that'll be March or whatever.
Commissioner Walsh, just a quick note, there's some problems with sound, so all of you, when you're talking, if you could be careful and just talk a little bit louder. Some of you, the folks online, are having a hard time.
Okay.
Brian, can you just clarify, you mentioned wild and scenic, the bear trap section is in the tester bill and then.
And more, it's actually, well, bear trap is currently wilderness area, but it's not wild and scenic. So I forget the exact, it's a good chunk of the upper Madison that's in the proposal.
Chris, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so I mean, wild and scenic rivers, as Brian was saying, that does require what's called a CRMP, Comprehensive River Management Plan. Part of that CRMP is a visitor use capacity, similar to what we've been discussing. And then regards to the proposed legislation, there is the Headwaters Legacy Act, something along those lines. Includes 3 parts on the Madison, includes the upper Madison down to the end of Story Ditch property, I believe, and then Bear Trap Canyon, then has the lower Madison as a recreation section as well.
And it's up for grabs right now, whether this bill.
We can't hear you, Casey. I don't know what it sounded, it just got worse.
You know, Tester staff and the folks at American Rivers are optimistic that the Headwaters Legacy Act will be approved, but we'll see. I mean, I've heard that it's not even going to be brought to the floor until after the election.
I have no idea on any of that kind of information. That's not something that they normally share with us at the agencies. So I haven't even heard if it's even, I don't think it's out of the floor or out of the committee. So it would be is away at this point if it did come.
Anyway, something to think about. Why don't we go ahead and kick off with the big hole beaverhead discussion? Mike, you want to take over? And I want to introduce for those who don't know him, Eric Thorson, owner of Sunrise Fly Shop, is here from Melrose. He's a large outfitter over on the big hole.
How do we do this?
You talk to the screen and tell him you're ready.
Kim, we're ready.
Kim will magically make it happen.
Just give me one moment.
Okay.
Yes, I drove my Corvette today.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
It's regretted.
Mike, I really appreciate the time you put in on putting the summary together.
Yeah, I had a little panic moment on Friday when the agenda came out. And I was like, oh, 'cause, it took a while. You'll see. There's yeah, we could go to the next one, Kim. Do I have to tell you when to switch?
Kim,
There
can
we
you
go.
minimize the
This
thing
thing?
at the side?
Actually, Mike, you might have to do that on the.
Oh, watch out. Here we go, baby. Oh, Kim can do it too, I think. There we go. So when we were talking about presenting, we're going over beaverhead big hole rules, which commonly we refer to just as BHC, beaverhead big hole. Said, oh, I went through this for the NRC meetings, and I did it as well as my previous working life. I was executive director for the Big Old River Foundation for 11 years prior to phone. So I was pretty familiar with the numbers on beaverhead, and I'm a permit holder on beaverhead. I said, oh, I can run through the numbers. We agreed to do that. And then we have Eric Thorson here, who's a Sunrise Fly Shop out of Melrose, who's one of the larger outfitters on the Big Hole. He's gonna, after I run through all the numbers, he's gonna talk about how each plan affects him and his outfitting business. The important thing I want to point out here too is on the Beaverhead and the Big Hole, they operate under a recreation use permit, which is state fish, wildlife, and parks only, not an SRP, which is a BLM, fish, wildlife, and park combination on the Madison. So we don't need SRPs on the BX2. Okay, Kim. I can't do it from here. Eileen? There we go. So kind of you know, you made the big time on around you on the Big Hole when this article appeared in 2010 on the front page of the Montana Standard, and it was written by our friend Nick Jivak. But at that time, Big Hole River Foundation was coming out against what they call Citizens Day on the Big Hole, where if you're not resident, you're not allowed to float certain sections. And so we made a proposal to the commission at that time when they were reviewing the rules, and it didn't go over well. I was working at the time with Steve Lubeck, and Tony Shonen was alive at the time. Joan Branches from the baseball, they really liked Citizens Day, and anyway, it didn't pass. So it wasn't the first time we dealt with opposition like that. Okay, Kim. So this, I put this in on the Microsoft Teams drive for us. This is a summary of the BH2 recreation rules. This was the revision from 2016 that are still in effect on the BH2. They review them, supposed to review them every 5 years, which would have been a review in 2021, but I think COVID got in the way, and also the Madison got in the way. There's a river ranger for, and the river ranger for BH2 is also the river ranger for Madison, and so it's Cheryl Morris. So I think their time was a little thin. But Beaverhead, as far as commercial use now, I'm only talking commercial use, is from its headwaters to Justin Park and Twin Bridges. And then the Big Hole is from its headwaters to the Jefferson. Essentially where it is, Beaverhead. Okay, Kim. The Big Hole, we should all know where it is, Southwest Montana, and the Beaverhead, and then for reference, we have the Madison in red there. Okay, Kim. One thing that's really unique, or one of the things in the rec plan of the BH2 that's really unique, is the idea of a one boat outfitter, and also what they called at the time temporary client days. So one boat outfitter, each outfitter on the BH2 has to designate whether they're a one boat outfitter or not. And a one boat outfitter is, they can only guide one boat at a time. They can't hire guides and use their permit for other guides to run their trips. It's the outfitter has to take the trip and then deliver that trip. So they can't use multi-boats. That's the thing. The other thing is temporary client days is early on in the process, and I'll get to how they selected this. They gave the BH2 each river 2,000 days of available use days that outfitters who were one boat outfitters can apply and get. It was up to 60 days when it first came out. You apply and get up to 60 days, and then operate those days for 5 years. And if you did that, then those days became yours. Kind of like extension service, right? Back in the day, you worked the farm for 20 years, 6 years. And then there's others. Okay, Kim. So the other thing that is not unique to the BHD, but we talked about it back in 2018 for the Madison, is what I call on-river boat distribution. It's not an allocation of days. It's not anything other than on the Beaverhead, it's 3 boats per day on the section from the dam to Hannaberry. So a river section, you can only have 3 boats as an outfitter on that section in one day. And yellow is 3 boats. There's a section, Barrett's, where the top plan is. Barrett's to Tash Bridge, which is a 1 boat section. It's tough access in there. It's not real common to be outfitting in there. There's a section from the 3rd Saturday in May through Labor Day called Tash to Trash. So it's Tash Bridge, forget the highway 191. Highway 91 bridge to Selway Bridge in Dillon, which is the dump road. So they call it Tash to Trash. It's Tash Ranch to the dump road. And that's close to outfitting from 3rd Saturday in May to Labor Day. Period. It's sort of the residence section of float. And then the section from pretty much Dillon, Selway Bridge to Twin Bridges is 1 boat a day per outfit. So it's they regulate distribution of boats by the number of boats put out there. Okay, Kim. Also on the Beaverhead is one of the, not as famous as the Big Hole, but they have a rest and rotation section. And it's the dam to Henneberry on the upper section, which is closed to outfitting and non-resident float outfitting on Saturdays. And then the section below that from Henneberry to Pipe Oregon FAS is closed on Sundays. So to outfitting and non-resident floating. So those are the 2 rest rotation sections. Okay, Kim. So now we're going to switch over to the Big Hole River and talk about on-river boat distribution there. They adopted a similar model for commercial users on the Big Hole. A big section of the Big Hole from the Headwaters to Mud Creek Bridge is close to outfitting. So a lot of people don't know that. It's pretty big section. It's that section up through Wisdom. And then from Mud Creek Bridge to essentially the Jefferson River, each outfitter is limited to 2 launches per day at the majors FAS. So you could, if you're outfitting and you got trips, you could run 2 from Glen, 2 from Notch, 2 from Melrose, etc. A little different than on-river boat distribution on the Beaverhead. Okay. Okay, Kim. Like magic.
Mike, are those launch sites limited to, are they identified in regulation or are they?
Yeah, can we go back, Kim? Yes. So
So what's the total
Right
number
here.
you could do theoretically?
so there's 1, 2, 3, 4. No, this is by 8. There's more than 8 launches. It's 2 per launch.
Many more than 8 launches, but 8 sections that they close.
Right. But that's different than what we're
Launches.
talking about here. I don't know. It's like
20,
might be like 14
really, yeah.
because I did bug samples of each one. I think it was about 4, somewhere in there. Let's say there's
14
10.
sites? or
So like
14?
20 boats a day
Okay,
could run on the big.
okay.
Or more.
And then, but on the Beaverhead, Andrew, I got in trouble with Andrew one time because I did a half day and then I went back up and then did another half, and then I went back again and he's like, oh, dude, you can't do that. 2, 3, yeah, so there's differences between each river. Okay, Kim. Good question though. And this is the the minutia of this rule package that really has, you got to understand it. This is what you were talking about, John. This is the rest and rotation, the famous rest rotation on the Big Hole, and the sections that it's implemented. I hope you're not colorblind. So the big 2 are Saturday and Sunday, right? So Sunday is Divide to Melrose, and then Saturday is Jerry Creek to Divide. Those are closed to outfitting and non-resident float fishing. So you have a buddy comes out from Pennsylvania and you're just a Montana resident, you want to go float. You cannot float these sections as a non-resident. Okay. And they're staggered, right? So there's 1 section closed per day and that's it. They're staggered. And now this is Tony Shonen. I have to remember that. Yeah. And then these are the sections we were talking about, the 8 sections. There's really 8, right? Because Knots to Twin Bridges, you can outfit anytime. Okay, okay, Kim. Okay, so the one of the big things that always comes up that a lot of people I think don't understand is the idea of the permit season on the Beaverhead. So the permit season on the Beaverhead is July and August. And by when they implemented the plan in 2001, they allocated days to outfitters based on historic use. And it was actually 6 years. So 95, 6, 7, 8, 99, and 2000. Took the best of those 5 years for each outfitter for July and August on the Beaverhead, and that was their historic use. By doing that and only permitting for July and August, it created this idea of shoulder seasons. So an outfitter, say they only have 10 days for July and August, they do their 10 days, they can't outfit anymore on the Beaverhead until September comes around or it's June. Then they could run as many outfitted days as they can. It's unlimited. It's not regulated. The other thing is on the Beaverhead and the Big Hole, it's very important is these are their client days. They're not trips. So you got two dudes in your boat, you're outfitting, that's 2 days. So when an outfitter has 10 days, that's essentially 5 trips. So real important to remember because people often throw days around on the BH2 and then on Madison, we're mostly talking about trips.
Why did they use that client day concept? It seems that they just add more.
Because that, so when back in the day when we created logs for the outfitters, for the Board of Outfitters, and we recorded our daily use by the client day. And then Fish, Wildlife and Parks just adopted that system. Oh, we'll just manage it by days. Because prior to that, the outfitters, that's how they recorded their use.
You might add that it's also consistent with how the department reports fishing effort is in angler days.
Right.
It's not
Yep.
by trips. I mean,
Yep.
you can get it in trips, but
And-
it's
and-
in angler days that they estimate.
And Dan, it was only after, well, it was during the 2018 EA writing that it was Andrew and Travis that said, hey, and I remember talking to you, I said, dude, let's not worry about angler use days. It's really the unit, the boat is the unit. So whether it's 1 or 2 people, it's still a boat going down the river. So they kind of adopted the trip idea. So that'll come into play later. Okay, Kim, thank you.
Like, the allocation that was made back up based on those years, was that only for trips you did in July?
Yes.
and August?
Yes, yep, that's a good point. And so they did the same thing on the Big Hole. Right? They took, except for the Big Hole, it's June and July. And I've been outfitting on the Big Hole for like 20 years now, and I still get which month is
June
which.
and July, not July, August.
Correct. June and July. And they took the same years, 95, 6, 7, 8, 99, and 2000. And then took the best of those 5 years for each outfitter that their number of trips were just June and July. And then that's how they allocated days. And then the same thing on the Big Hole is when you're allocated for June and July, you have unlimited availability of use outside.
The selection of the 2 months, different for the 2 rivers, was that determined largely by the was historically the highest usage period.
That's
And the prime fishing time, if you want to say.
It's a good question, but I don't think so. Because you'll see June on the Beaverhead it was really centered around, and this is hearsay, right? And this is the negotiations that were going on when Fish Wildlife Park was doing this in '99, was the primary driver was the big hole, and it was salmon flies on the big hole. Freaking June was just too busy, stay the heck off. And the Beaverhead was the afterthought. And the idea was, oh man, you're restricting me in June on the big hole. At least let me guide on the Beaverhead. I suspect that's the conversation that happened. There's another thing that happened. Because we have time. Originally, this was all being talked about in this year, 2000. Originally, they went back 5 years, 95, 6, 7, 8, 9. There were outfitters that said, hey man, I did trips in 2000. You know, you're not counting me. There was a lawsuit threatened, and Fish, Wildlife and Park said, okay, we'll include 2000. And so there were some outfitters that got their allocation that way. So they went back 6 years. You good?
Like quickly,
Yeah.
was there an adjudication process if someone said, you know, hey, look, I was diagnosed with cancer or some reason?
So they, like an appeal process.
Right.
It kind of was, but it wasn't official. It was, hey man, oh, okay. There wasn't anything established. Utilized.
And that was managed by FWP.
Yeah,
Also have a lot of years to choose from. So
right.
sooner, people had it.
Yep.
Sooner, one of those years.
But you'll see, it was seems a little, it wasn't as volatile user-wise. Seemed like back then. I mean,
More water in the river too, in the big hole. That's why July was.
well, no, that's not true.
No.
No, it's actually an inverse because of the drought management plan and the grayling regulations. So that happened like in the 80s, that happened. And they instituted drought management plan and grayling threats, and flows were actually
I
way
still
better.
remember the river being closed every year like it is these days. But maybe it was.
Well, so they also manipulated triggers. Triggers were different when the drought management plan was first put in.
Sure.
And DEQ every 10 years reevaluates their 10%. So the numbers officially dropped, even though, like when you talk about water flow average. That's kind of, we're getting off into the weeds. Okay, Kim. Thank you. Speaking of which, drought management plan, right? So that's the Beaverhead Recreation Plan. It's on the Microsoft Teams. I put it on as a PDF. It's 7 pages. There's a lot of detail in there. It's something to look at. The other thing that influences commercial use on the Big Hole, well, all angler use on the Big Hole, and influences shoulder seasons, which we'll talk about, is the Big Hole River Watershed Committee Drought Management Plan. And it was instituted in the 90s. And it's based on flow triggers, and it's also based on temperature. So the Big Hole, one of the only watershed groups in the state that has the authority to, or Fish, Wildlife and Park conceded authority to the Watershed Committee to allow them to do this plan. And it's 5 sections. So the upper river from Saginaw Bridge really to the North Fork of the Big Hole. And then, which is is kind of a moot point for us because usually by the time this part gets triggered or closed, we're not allowed to outfit up there anyway. The next section is from the North Fork to Dickie Bridge, which is an important landmark. It's for us, it's right below East Bank FAS. From Dickie Bridge to Divide is the third section. And then probably the most famous section is Divide to Notch, which incorporates the Canyon section. And then the bottom, which is Notch Bottom or Tony Shonin, the Twin Bridges. And each of these has flow triggers based on the river gauge within that section that allows the Watershed Committee to Delaware Fish, Wildlife, and Parks to close that section to fishing when it goes below that flow. And then there's also reopening criteria when flows come back up. And I put the Watershed Committee drought plan in the Microsoft Teams as well, so you can look at it. It's important because what happens is one of the early, we hit a drought year like last year. This section closes right away because it's below 150. The upper section closes right away because it drops below 20 cubic feet at Wisdom. And you see big holes closed, and it's those two lower sections. Thankfully, the triggers around Melrose and Divide usually keep it open, even in a year like last year, that allow people to still fish. So, and that's that. Often when this section closes, this upper section down the Dickie Bridge, things are getting kind of dry.
Mike, are you thinking that there's an application for this logic in what we're doing?
No. I told Casey I wouldn't interpret it. And the reason, so it's good to have a drought management plan.
Yeah,
right.
I mean,
It's good to have hoot owls go into effect as well. But what happens when you couple this, when it's overlaid with the rest of the rotation schedule, this section's closed anyway. It's it's open to commercial use, but there's no water. And the same thing happens on the bottom end, usually from like Brown's Bridge down. Seth and the Twin Bridges outfitters can talk to you. Closures on the lower.
I just got a text from somebody online. They said when you face the microphone, they can hear you, but when you turn away, you can't. I know it's awkward, but you can project.
Sorry. I know, and I'm like, okay, we get there. So we have these overlapping. The bottom line is we have these overlapping regulations that impact not just commercial use, they impact commercial use pretty hard, but also non-resident use and shoulder season use, right? If this is the only section open, there's no water up there, and same with down here. Okay, Kim. Okay, the Madison it's not the BH2, right? We're starting to get into the numbers now. What's different between these three rivers? And I think it's kind of cool. I was going through these numbers quite a bit, but in the year I chose, right? So user days on the Madison, this is out of biennial angler pressure surveys that Don Scar talked about, and we all talked about. In 2017, the Madison had 207,000 user days. The Big Hole had 95,000, which actually is a lot, but the Madison's an order of magnitude greater. And then the Beaverhead, the lowest at 22,000 user days. Okay, so.
That's angling days though, right?
It's angler days.
There's additional use days, which
Right.
is not angling.
Right, and this is only the upper. Okay, there's nuances here, but broad brush, the Madison has over twice the use of the Big Hole, and 10 times the use of the Beaverhead. I almost said the F word. Okay. R&R is resident, non-resident, which comes into play, I think, when we talk about managing non-commercial use. It was a big driver on the big hole. So the big hole is roughly 50-50. Residents to non-residents. I think it's mostly because it's harder to drive to the big hole from Utah. The Beaverhead's the first one you hit, or the Madison. Resident, non-resident use on the Madison is 50,000 to 150,000, so 1 to 3, 2 to 1. Quite a bit, and then similar ratios on the Beaverhead. And I pick on Utah all the time, but it's still an order of magnitude greater on the Madison. So when I bring this in because we were talking about, at the time, we were talking about walkway use on the upper and resident, non-resident use on the upper Madison. Okay, length of the float section on the Madison, and most of the stuff we apply or we think about is the 37-mile section from Lines to Ennis, but we still float in the lower. So, and this comes into play, was a discussion point for implementing rest and rotation on the Madison. The big hole is a 102-mile float section. That's from Mud Creek to the mouth. So less than half as many people and 3 times the amount of river to work. And then the Beaverhead, 14 miles from the dam to barracks. But commercial users could also have those other sections to float. It's about 30 miles to Twin, from Sailway to Twin, but it's one boat. Tash to Trash is 5 miles, but closed in the summer. So just nuances and differences. And then commercial user days. So I converted the number of trips for 2018 on the Madison was 22,363 user days. On the big hole, 2018 was 6,700. On the Beaverhead was 3,500 total trips, including shoulder season. Okay, just kind of a broad brush, all 3 rivers at the same time. Okay, Tim. Oh, boy.
Just to clarify, so trips in that case means 2 anglers.
Right, right. So those were user days. So 2 guys in the boat counts as 2. And if we went back, it was whatever it was, 12,700 trips. Okay. All right. So one of the things that happened on the Beaverhead and on the BH2s when they implemented allocation was a moratorium on outfitters. So if you didn't have a license and outfitted historic use on the Beaverhead or Big Hole by the year 2000, you weren't going to get an outfitter license on the Beaverhead or Big Hole for the remainder, unless it was sold. You know, we can talk about that. But when they did
You
that,
weren't going to get a permit.
a permit, correct. You can be an outfitter.
Yeah.
You might not have days, right? So when they did that, they had a finite number of outfitters. On the Big Hole, it was about 100 and some. So it was over on the Red Big Hole, number of outfitters, permitted outfitters. Okay, no more. They also have rules, Mac and Scott are intimately familiar. They had to, you weren't allowed to transfer partial trips. Like I couldn't sell you 50 trips. I had to sell you everything. Okay, so with that, I call it the blob. You remember the movie The Blob, with the black blob that encompassed, you know, everything. And so one outfitter can purchase another outfitter's business, but had to acquire all the days that they had. So he might have had 100 days and bought your permit for 100 days. Now he has a 200-day permit. And that's it. And so we went from 2 outfitters to 1 outfitter. And so what happened is we have an attrition of outfitters This is on the Beaverhead over time from in the year 2001 at 100 and something, and now it's down to 63 because of this blob effect of one outfitter acquiring the other outfitter's permit. The other thing,
Can you explain the mechanism that actually caused a brief increase? in
yeah,
outfitters?
that's where I'm going now. The other thing that happened was they implemented this 2,000-day temporary user pool. And so I'm an outfitter. I only have 10 days. I signed up as a single boat. I applied for my temporary user days. I got 20 days on the Big Hole. I got 20 days on the Beaverhead. And after 5 years, so now we're in 2006, I have 20 days. I'm an outfitter. I have a permit now. And so that's what accounts for these increasing numbers. But no more temporary days on the Big Hole or the Beaverhead. So that pool of days is gone. There's no new outfitters being brought into this system. And so we have an attrition of the number of outfitters over time.
What happened in 2017 then? Why it jumped back up?
It was the same thing, temporary user days. So there was still some out there. But now that, I think the temporary user days on PHT were done last year, 19.
There, occasionally there's some added back into the pool through a couple of.
There's mechanisms for use it or lose it on the BHT. If you don't use your days within 5 years, they can pull them. If you don't sell them, a couple of permits came back, increased the pool. There's been some fluctuation of that. That's a good discussion to have when we talk about use it or lose it. It's important, I think. But overall, declining numbers because of this accumulation of days. Okay, Kim.
Some of the original client days came from, how was that decided, those open days that didn't belong to us?
So they allocated days and then added 2,000.
To allow for growth.
To allow, it wasn't like, oh, we got to allow for growth. It was more of how do we, if an outfitter is going out, how do we get a new outfitter coming in? It was I think it was more of a sustainability concept than oh, let this pie grow. Because we'll see the pie's not growing at all.
Would it be safe to say that it was in part to give a vehicle for a new outfitter? or
Absolutely.
young
That's exactly
people
what
to
it was.
come into the system?
Yep.
But
Okay.
there wasn't a caveat on who qualified.
No, there wasn't originally, but then there was
Then
in
it kicked in
2011.
later. So, well, the caveat, the logical caveat would have been, you would have had to been a new outfitter to the system to acquire those days,
Right.
but that wasn't originally the
It
deal.
was not originally.
So Mike could actually have had capacity, not had the days and applied as an existing outfitter.
Or been completely unqualified, because they were getting guys from,
But
not that they
anyway,
were unqualified,
kind of an
but
interesting.
unexperienced, had no experience on Beaverhead Big Hole. And so Fish Wildlife and Parks implemented their sort of a qualifications. You had to apply and meet minimum qualifications to be an outfitter on the Beaverhead.
More than just becoming an outfitter,
Right.
getting your
Yep.
license.
Yep. Good questions. Okay, so temporary client days, just like overall decline in outfitters are disappearing and are now gone. Okay, so I think by 19 they were gone. Okay, Kim, I want to click forward. Okay, so 2001, they allocate the days, and it was about 5,400. All the outfitters that had days, and it's actually less than that because they added 2,000. This is, and on the Big Hole, this gets to what I was talking to about use it or lose it. The Big Hole permit, you can have a 337 days on the Beaverhead, and you don't have to guide all of those 337 days to go from one year to the next. You can hang on to that. And, it says how many you have to use, like 5 or 1. You have to use 1 day.
One every 2 years.
And then, so to maintain your permit. And because it's an RUP and not an SRP, it's $4 a day for your permit. So you got your 300 days on the Beaverhead, you send your $1,200 in, you take your client out for a day, you get for another couple of years. You're not going to lose those days. So what happens with that is we have total available allocation, right, of 5,500 days on the Beaverhead, and the outfitters are only using 30% of that. So 1,700 days or 1,700 user days were guided in 2018 when there was an availability or an allocation of 5,600. Okay.
Do you know how those historical or the actual use numbers would compare if you took that time period, the 6 years that created the allocation? Because people could use their highest of the 6, but probably averaged out there closer to that realistic red line.
That's a good question. A couple challenges. One is we don't know, we have no record of use between 2001 and 2011. It was all paper filled out, and we got new river rangers and we got new recreation managers, and those numbers disappeared. We were thankful in 2011 that these guys, we said, oh man, I can't keep track of all this paper. Let's enter this. So
I'm just surmising there. Okay.
no, that's a good point.
We're fortunate to have a rich historical guidelines of the Madison River. And when you look at best of approach, which we've already seen, so in a best of 2 that's been initially adopted, the cumulative number of trip caps is actually 16% higher than the highest of either of those years. If you go to like a best of 3 and you go to any window within those 3 years, you end up with a 20%. You go to a best of 5, you go up into so yeah, 6 years.
So when we say, oh man, we're at 16,400, but we probably won't use that first year, that's because we have information that shows that it wasn't done. Go ahead.
Do you have that same graph?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep. That just keeps you waiting.
And Mike, just to clarify, so everybody understands some of the nuances on the both the Beaverhead and the Big Hole. If an outfitter that was very active in 1998 and has a high limit, but they're no longer very active, but they're still offering a little bit. Are there any mechanisms at all, like if someone at one point ran 100 client days, but now is only doing about 10 a year, is there any mechanism, can they give 90 days back to the state? Can they transfer it to someone else? Is there any way to access that?
Yeah, I bet it's available to do that, but no. So you're starting to see why Big Hole days are going for $47,000 for 1 day on the Beaverhead, right? For a commercial. All these mechanisms are. It wasn't a conscious decision in 2000 to do that. It was a consequence that, oh, we didn't know this was going to happen. We didn't know numbers were going to decline to 2000. So that's July and August on the Beaverhead, dude. That's not a lot. That's like, it's like a 4th of July weekend on the Madison. But the point is, available, right? Available to use, and this is what the end is. Okay, Kim. Thank you. Shoulder season use, right? We talked about this. Now remember too that originally they didn't set this up as shoulder season. They set this up as permitted season and then everything else that was left. So on the Beaverhead, we had a high in 2011 of 2,300 days, and then shoulder season use drops off to 13, 14, and then begins to climb again, and now it's back up. Why? Well, in 2014, whatever the Clark Canyon Reservoir was had a big sludge event, and in September we had this huge sludge pulse that came down. It came down in 2015. It came down in 2016. So August, September, it was, and as these years went on, so 15 it happened earlier into August. 16 it happened like freaking the end of July, and it was like a sewer. So use dropped off a lot, and even in the shoulders. And then as water years got better, 17, 18, 19 is higher. So we have this decline in shoulder season use on the Beaverhead. Okay, Kim. Then there's different ways you could have presented this. This is permit season, shoulder season, and then combined, okay, for the Beaverhead. So by year, it's running, it was running 50-50 in 2011, kind of ends at 50-50, 3,500 user days, 2018. But the take home message, I think mostly because of that sludge events, overall outfitted use on the Beaverhead declined, shoulder seasons declined, peak use declined. So the trend was down, it's coming back up. Still low. Okay, Kim. So now we switch rivers, we go to the big hole. I couldn't think, I'm not a color guy, so what color should the big hole be? I don't know. But number of outfitters through the years started at over 100. 18, we're down to 85. I think we're down in the 81, 79 number right now, number of outfitters on the big hole. Okay. Okay, Kim. Temporary client days, same thing as the Beaverhead. Started at a nice big pool and down to 0. Okay, Kim. Well, things are different on the big hole. So allocated versus used, a little bit a more improved proportion. So right around 65% of the allocated days in June and July on the big hole are outfitted. And it's hovering around $3,000. Okay, Kim. And a lot of that is driven by a water year. Shoulder season use on the big hole, right? This is was an issue for George Grant TU and others. It's been increasing. So right around 3,000 to almost 3,500 in 2018, and I don't have the numbers, but higher in 19 and 20.
Water conditions have a big impact on that, I would assume.
12, yeah. So 11 was a great water year. 12 was not a good water year. And the only reason I remember that is I was sampling bugs through all that. And then from 2012 all the way to 17 was increasing better use. And John, when I looked at this, I didn't have it by month or day. I just had total numbers by outfitter. So I couldn't tell you if it was more in the fall or more in the spring, but it'd be good to get. It'd be fun to look at. Okay, Kim. And then numbers combined for the big hole, right? Permitted season, shoulder season, then total increasing numbers on the big hole, being driven largely by, well, there's room in the permit season, but shoulder season is increasing at twice the rate. Now, when I say this is important, so the scale here, right, is only 7,000. If I did a similar graph for the Madison, it's an order of magnitude more. So, although shoulder season, because we're ingrained in thinking Madison use numbers, right? We say shoulder seasons on the big hole increased by 1,000 over 8 years. It's like we did that in 30 minutes on Madison, but it's what, 15% of total use in the shoulders on the big hole, increase in growth.
In the big hole,
That's my point.
the permitted season is 2 months.
Correct.
And is this telling me that the remaining 10 months is the 50% of effort? Is that what this is
Yes.
saying?
Shoulder seasons are 10 months.
10 months long. So it took 10
Well,
months.
shoulder seasons aren't really, they're not really,
But not really, but not really. Yeah.
they're not 10 months.
Yeah. So, but,
It's kind of hard to float
well, no, I got you, but
each
functionally.
bank.
what people talk-
And it's not even fair to say it's 10 months. It's June and July, and then you got March, April, May,
That's what I was.
September,
asking.
October.
That's right, from your point of
and
view.
even into November.
Yep, yep. Right, yeah.
Unless it's really cold and big bucks of time. But yeah, it's not an equivalent amount of time. Okay, Kim. Oh, there we go. So some of you guys might know where that is. Most of you won't. That's the North Fork. Thanks. Thank you. I'm glad I got to do this. I think nobody in the history has ever seen those numbers. Except maybe Andrew.
Are you putting this up on the team?
Yeah, it's on there. It's on there as a PDF.
Okay.
So you'll get each slide as,
Thanks, Mike.
and then the management plan is on there and the details of the BH2 rec management plan.
Hang on a second. Thanks very much. Eric's going to join you.
Yeah.
We're going to just kind of get into a discussion now about what are the key learnings that we take away from the BH2 for the Madison.
So this, or would not do, right?
Right, exactly.
We would weigh, I
What
think,
works, what doesn't.
really great. So for those of you who don't know, rest and rotation is gone on the Madison, at least for right now, which I don't know, it was a big fight at the end, I think. I was, man, you could tell by the email coming out of Foam 8, send letters to the commissioners, but it was, I'm glad it worked out. And then Eric out of, so I think it's kind of cool. I started at the Big Old River Foundation at the beginning of 2006. And then that was your first year as well at Melrose. And then there's some things I could have done and I didn't, like I should have. I wanted to do a distribution of outfitter days for Beaverhead and the Big Hole. I've done that for the Madison and you've seen it. It's a little, the distribution of days on the BH2 is a little different. There's a lot of kind of flat. There's a couple of big outfitters. Most of them are kind of flat and then about 100 or so. And then there's a couple small ones.
Eric, as an operator, maybe you can chime in and add what Mike's just discussed. I'm really curious what really works well and things.
Well, and the thing about it too is, and it's good to see Chris and Seth come in here because what works well in my neck of the woods may work totally differently for them. And there's certain things that I think work great. There's certain things that cause a bunch of headaches, and none of them are unmanageable. But it ties, like what Mike was saying with the drought management plan, BMP. When that gets implemented, then things get even more complicated. So with the rotation in May, when we're at 5,000 CFS, that rotation is totally different than when we're at 500 CFS. And that rest rotation, some of those sections that are on that, we can't float. So it becomes irrelevant in August. We have a drought management plan take place like what happened this year. And we have sections start closing. So it starts compressing how much of the river can be fished. And through a majority of the summer this year, because it's such severe drought, we had it basically open from Dickie Bridge to FWP Maiden Rock. And so that's about 35 miles of river. And so rest rotation only became an issue on really Saturday and Sunday, sections that were still open. So what would happen on Saturday when Jerry Creek to Divide would be closed for rest rotation, everything got compressed from Divide down to FWP Maiden Rock. And so all of that's good in theory from a rest standpoint. It's good in theory from a drought management standpoint, but in execution, it caused major compression and overutilization of those areas.
Can you come there just from your knowledge on Nickel? Are there some access points that are not used because of their location? In other words, maybe they're 5 miles from a boundary of where you can't go past.
Yeah, so
there's this sort of synchronized floaters.
It depends on the day and it depends on the flow. And that's the thing, is the flow is so dynamic on that river. You can't look at it in May, let's say third Saturday in May, right, when those come into place, and look at it the same as you would in August. It's a totally different river. And so, but during, let's say in May, third Saturday in May, first week of June, we have this rotation and we have some sections on the upper river that close. And a good example would be when it closes from, let's say, Fish Trap down to East Bank. When the river's really high, you can still technically go fishing and outfitting from Dickie or from Mud Creek down to Fish Trap, but it's not enough to do a day. And so in a sense, when that section's closed for rest rotation, it closes more than one section. Even though you still could do it, you couldn't get more than 3 or 4 hours out of the float.
It's working really well.
In fact, we've been doing it for 20 years.
Yeah,
I
we're
mean,
using that.
it just, we don't know any different.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, I know with Seth and Chris, they're in the same boat. As long as we've been doing it with these rules. And you get used to it, you don't know any different. You just know you can't go fishing on Sunday from Divide to Melrose. And you adapt, you adjust. From June 1st to the end of July, you know you have this many days to use. And you try to plan it out. And you can't, when salmon flies hatch, you can't use 100% of your days. I mean, you could, but if you want to run a business for the full 2 months, you can't use all your days during the most popular time. You got to kind of plan out your business so that you can still have enough days to take people fishing at the end of July. And same thing on the Beaverhead in August.
If you could address two hypotheticals, maybe. One is, if you want to grow your business, what are the challenges or opportunities for you? And two, if you were a new young outfitter coming in, or a new person who wants to become an outfitter and work the river, what are the challenges or opportunities that they have?
As far as business growth, 2 months a year, your business is capped.
Unless you acquire another.
Yeah, unless you go and acquire other days. So you have to look at other avenues to grow your business during that 2 months. Other rivers, other areas. You can obviously fish other places, but on that river, growth's capped.
I think, Eric, that brings up a good point in that because of the blob effect, there is no availability of small number of day permit holders out there, like that, because they were gobbled up. So, you know, if you wanted to grow your business by 30% and find a guy who was willing to sell you 30 days, there are no outfitters out there with just 30 days. They have 300 or they have one.
No, there's still some. There's a couple. Yeah.
There's a lot less.
There's a handful. But the cost to step into it
The
is,
payback on it is crazy.
it's cost prohibitive. If somebody was starting out trying to do this, it'd be tough.
So
And to
so
get
that's the
enough-
second part of my question was a young guide or outfitter wanting to get into the business.
Yeah.
They need a deep pocket or.
Is that a scenario that could occur on the Madison?
I don't know enough about the Madison to say anything intellectually about the
That's a
Madison.
good question. And in the petitions that we put forward, even Mac had some input on a lot of those. We tried to incorporate techniques or methods within that commercial use management plan that we drafted to overcome the pitfalls of this. The other thing that happened with, and I mentioned this with through the last legislative session, the new law that allows partial transfer and leasing and breakup of permits to allow other outfitters to acquire them are now available on the Madison. The Beaverhead Big Hole was omitted from that legislation to protect these
Yeah.
guys.
And that
The
was
system in
really
place.
important for us and both rivers. If we have, like we're showing the numbers, how many days are available and how many outfitters there are. If we start pairing those out and letting them sell 10 days at a piece, all of a sudden we go from, like on the Beaverhead, you said, with 68,
Right.
we could go to 275. And then shoulder use would be out of control. The regulated time period would stay the same amount of days would still exist, but it would be shoulder use that would go out of control. And the Beaverhead, the Big Hole, could not sustain that kind of pressure.
Because shoulder use currently is an unlimited district.
Yes, it is.
So
But
yeah,
but a good example of that I was talking to Mike about, and I think Casey and I were talking about this. The Big Hole somewhat self-regulates. I mean, yes, we can float over 100 miles of the river in May, but in September, we're down to 45 miles that's really floatable. And on a year like this, it was down to maybe 20 miles that was, you could actually float. You weren't really floating all day, you were driving your boat. And so the amount of people that want to go and use that and outfit on that resource when it's like that is diminished greatly. And so it kind of self-regulates.
So this was one of the things that drove the decision on that bill as we approached this process. We were vapor locked on a commercial use management plan because there was no transferability for the Madison.
Yep.
It was going to fall under the same rules. So we went ahead, got legislation through that allows that transfer to occur. Listen to these guys, and they didn't want it over there. I look at those graphs and say, well, about 40% of your use is unutilized. And it was legitimately acquired under the rules. And we're operating a plan right now that is built to underutilize the commercial side of it. You love it because it's a business thing for you, but there's a whole bunch of unattainable use right now.
And I will take it a step from, I'm also on the Watershed committee, on the Drought subcommittee. And from an overutilization of the resource, I think I look at it from the standpoint of that much more so than I do from a business standpoint.
Yeah, no, I got you, but so I'm trying to weigh out the notion that we've got. A question I do have, and this, I'm not sure you can answer this, perhaps the department. Wrestling rotation was designed to provide a benefit to the resident in some fashion or another. You know, theoretically, as Mac takes his wife down, I don't have to run into you guys.
Yeah.
And that has merit all by itself, I suppose. But you would think that it would be translated into some kind of a better catch rate or something that could be measured. Have we ever evaluated that at all?
No.
So we've got this model because we love it. And I don't want to see a guided fisherman on there. I just detest that. That's why we have it. We've never evaluated it to determine whether you're actually gaining a higher catch rate or, I mean, your total satisfaction is I don't have to look.
So
And
man,
then the other thing I
That's
don't
what it
think
is.
about- the other thing we have to look at is utilization of the rest.
right, that's,
Yeah.
and Eric just touched on it. So in 2006, it was my first year, and FWP it's in that packet that I gave you. FWP is doing their evaluation of BHT rules. And I says, oh, can I get the numbers for use on it? Because at that time, for me, rest and rotation called Citizens Day was really big. It was brewing and unavailable because everything was on paper. 2011, I made another series of requests. I think that was your first year. Oh, we just started putting these in the computer. Well, that was 11. Every year since then, I requested these numbers. And to do just that, you'll see in the rule that they have to evaluate.
Yeah, I got that part.
And it's never been done, ever.
I would like to see catch rates separated by partition, stratified into those days.
Well, and
I
this
would
is
like to know
why,
what that fishery does when you,
Rested and rotated.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I want to see, because I think premise is fundamental.
I'll get back.
Yeah.
But a good example of that, and I know it's, again, back to talking to Chrissy in this, let's say divide to Melrose closed on Sunday.
Right.
Well, we're in the salmon fly hatch, but the salmon flies are up at Jerry Creek.
That's right.
Nobody's gonna fish it.
No.
It'll
So
be
you put
closed.
everybody.
So you,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, there's
It's a
no,
strange piece of public
no
policy.
rule for you to keep resident in those areas.
no, and I mean, they should be able to utilize it. It's just a matter of like, when there's a section closed to non-residents and guides, and it doesn't get utilized at all on that Sunday.
We can tell you that compliance from the outfitters is 100%. At least the last couple of years of pushing that.
Well, I'm sure
Except
people
for-
are gonna make mistakes, but I think.
Except for one assessed guy who.
I
Yeah,
will
we'll
say
see.
that I was to be in a closed section by accident. Fishing is really good.
Where is everybody?
Right.
This is great.
Right.
One or two observations that I think your presentation really showcased well, Mike, is when we talk about permit systems, there is always a difference between permit capacity and actual use. That's true also for rivers that have non-commercial permits. So that's really important to understand the distinction. Probably on the Madison, we would expect with the ability to partially transfer and have more flow and fluidity of trips, we wouldn't be underutilizing by 40 to 60% of the historic use. But when we see the cumulative number, the actual use will not go to that number if there's a cap.
If there's a moratorium on the number of outfitters.
Well, if there's a moratorium on the number of trips, if
Right.
regardless of whether you limit other.
So I have another presentation on this, and I presented it to the NRC. And it's the reason that, so there's 225 outfitters on the Madison, there's 68 on the BH2. And the whole talk is using the numbers to show how increasing the number of outfitters on the Madison did not correlate to increasing the number of trips. Because there are so many outfitters on the Madison that are just doing a small number of trips. There's 85% of all the outfitters on the Madison are doing 100 trips a day. And it's a huge, it's 175 dudes, right? So you have this big, long, a large population of outfitters doing huge numbers of trips, and on it's almost opposite on the BH2. It's a small, finite number of outfitters doing as many trips as they can, and that's why I was saying earlier that distribution is flatter and higher.
And Mike, I'll comment on that because on the Madison, there's no limits. I mean,
Right.
any outfit could get a permit. And so There's a lot of permits. So we got a buddy that lives in Sheridan, Wyoming, that's got a Madison permit.
Yep.
And so we have outfitters that come from Missoula and, Big Timber.
Right, that's
And
the,
every once in a while, they might have a client that's especially been forever and wants to do some variety. And on the BH2 system, because the number of permits are limited, but you have unlimited use in those shoulders, each permit becomes very valuable. And it doesn't quite make sense if you're only gonna run 1 or 2 trips a year on the big hole to try to obtain
right,
that
it doesn't
permit.
happen.
And so it ends up consolidating to be much more regionally influenced, because there's a lot more value if those are your home waters. And it would still be of interest, we'd be interested in a beaverhead permit, but.
I would argue that that's not what's happening. It's happening it's happening on both rivers, but to a huge extent, we have this long drawn out tail of non-local outfitters on the Madison, because they can go over there and do one trip. The mechanisms in each system are almost opposite. They're driving those numbers and that distribution. It's finite on the BH2. You can't get in, and you're going to do.
I guess my
you're
point is,
probably
if
not
I
gonna
had
do
a
one
one,
trip.
if I had a permit and I only ever used it once a year, and I lived in Missoula or Big Timber, and I had a big old, right? And I knew I could sell my big old business to someone that was a Dillon that could use it 30, 40 days.
right.
You can utilize the shoulders, like that's a lot of value to them, and that's not really currently much value to me. So sometimes those really small, get transferred to people that can maximize and utilize it better.
Correct. I agree.
And then just one other observation, because we've experienced this when it comes to a challenge for new entry. Because there are so few permits, especially small use permits, and that permit allows you to run a lot of trips in the shoulder. There's really no affordable option to come into the system. So a permit, a couple of years ago, we obtained a big hole permit that only had 2 user days. That's like 1 trip during peak. And we paid over $10,000 for it, which is a good deal at the time. And we view the value because, maybe we'll go over 6 or 7 times a year on those shoulders, which is about, we use it maybe 5 or 6 trips a year. One trip in like July and the rest going over that lower section from this valley. But that's a challenge. And for a new outfitter that wants to go into that system, there's really hardly ever a permit becomes available. And there's really not a lot of permits left that have very small use. So there's sort of a minimum entry level that's.
You're right. And that's what's keeping those numbers like they are.
Hey, Mike, could you clarify the qualification on BH2 for a permitted person to participate in the shoulder season? Because
it's like 3 years experience on either river. It's a 1-page application, but it has to do with river experience.
It's an application that's scored. They're scored on a yearly basis, whether there's actually any days to allocate or not. And that takes into account experience, guiding, and outfitting on the big old beaverhead, other rivers, length of being an outfitter. There's a scoring process involved in that. But the historic use of the big old beaverhead weighs heavily into that, as does how many years you've applied for that permit or for the temporary client days.
So I appreciate that. That wasn't actually my question.
Oh.
The question I have is explain that if you have a BH2 permit, what does that qualify you to do in the shoulder season that someone else can't do if they don't have a BH2?
I'd embellish that for my application. Why in the world would someone pay $47,000?
Because then you get the shoulders.
You get the shoulders.
Because even though you wouldn't be able to do more than 1 day during, let's say, big old June and July, you can do unlimited April, May,
August, September, October.
You have to have a permit. You have to have a permit to guide on the river at all, period.
But to get that, you have to have days in that peak period.
At least one.
Correct.
At least one day.
And
then you
that's
can-
exactly why Casey, remember that public comment period with that gal? And I let it slip that 10 days went for $47,000. That's why that 10-day permit on the big hole went for $87,000.
And there actually is I know for sure of at least one beaverhead permit that had 0 peak use days. Yeah. Because the outfit originally had some historic use that were shoulders, so they were permitted to operate in the river. But they aren't able to operate in the peak.
Andrew said.
Yeah.
No longer, yes.
Casey,
That one's gone.
I've got a quick question. I became an outfitter on the Big Hole River in 1994, and when I was doing most of my guiding out there, Eric's shop Sunrise at the top end, and we Seth and Chris's shop Four Rivers at the bottom end for all shuttles, both awesome operations. I'd love to get answers from both of you guys, please, on 2 questions I've got. One, how do you perceive peak and shoulder seasons working for you? If you like it, what would you change about it if you'd rather see the entire season regulated where every day was attached to license? And then the second question is, what's your pros and cons of the 2-boat per launch per day per outfitter? How does that work? What are the pros and what are the negatives of limiting outfitters to 2 boats per day per launch per outfitter? Eric, please.
Well, I'll start with the second question. The
Yep.
pros and cons of that. For the most part, I think it's a pro in the fact that rarely do I roll up to a boat launch and see 25 other outfitters or other boats getting ready to go that are going to be guided trips. You usually see 4 or 5, sometimes during the peak season, you'll see 10 or 12, but rarely is it a ton. The downfall of that is when you get a group of 4 boats, they're all together, like, we really want to go together today, we want to float the same section. The answer is no. And there's no way around it. I mean, there's one access we have that's available for a good portion of the year, but we could put 2 boats in at East Bank, 2 boats in at Dickie Bridge, they're only a mile apart. The 2 that put in at Dickie Bridge slow down, the 2 put in the East Bank speed up, by lunch you've caught up.
Sure.
But other than that, it's pretty difficult to have a larger group that wants to fish together and have lunch together. It can't happen.
Right. And how about the peak and shoulder? How does that work for you? How would you change it if at all?
And to be honest with you, I mean, I'm just speaking for the Big Hole and the Beaverhead. The peak usage stuff, it's when everybody wants to be there, and I think it serves a purpose. And again, trying to avoid overcrowding of the river. We all want to use the rivers during those times. It's when they usually are fishing the best. It definitely decreases our ability to increase revenue because we can't grow anymore during those times on those rivers. Or we have to alter the way that we do the business, where we go, how we try to generate revenue during those 2 months, because we know on the Big Hole and the Beaverhead, we can't do any more trips than we've been doing. So we try to do more business on the shoulder seasons and alter the way we do business as far as where we go and look at other options for increasing revenue.
Thank you. What about Seth and Chris? How do you guys feel about the 2 boats per day per?
I love it, honestly. I mean, it spreads the pressure out throughout the systems. We don't have a huge Big Hole permit, but if it's June 15th and we have 7 boats in our shop, chances are 1 boat's going to Madison, 2 boats going to Beaverhead, 1's going to Jeff, and 2 are going to Big Hole. So we had 2 Big Hole boats. Chances are we're not going to send 2 boats to the same stretch. We'd send 1 notch to Payne, 1 to the notch. Then they have that whole river themselves. Maybe Sunrise has a boat in there, maybe Ruby Springs has a boat in there, but it spreads the pressure out. So we kind of like that. Whereas in Madison, you can put 12 boats in as 1 outfitter at Lions Bridge, and that's it's really not fair. I mean, if you're a person learning to show up at Lions and there's 10 guys giving casting instruction in the parking lot, ruining a brand new fly line in the gravel, that's it's a joke.
Yeah.
So I think limiting the amount of boats boats per launch or per reach is actually a good thing.
Yeah, it comes into, more so like Eric was talking about, we're limited in that peak season. So it becomes more of looking at a protection of the resource in a way. Like, okay, yeah, 2 boats. If Eric and Ryan are in a divide, Chris and I pull in there, we'll go up with you, and throw in there because
we work
with each other. We like to separate, the quality of experience plays into it. And then just, keeping the pressure off the rivers just a limit. Every little bit helps when we're limited to these peak seasons, where all the big numbers of permits happen in 2 months. We like to try to spread it out and help them as much as we can.
And the nice thing about it is
We're all in
when
it
we
for
have,
business.
when we have those 2
Wrong,
months.
But there comes a time when we're all out of the game that the next generation's gonna want to use as well. If we just beat the snot out of it every day that maybe we're allowed to, it's not gonna be the same way. Especially with water conditions.
Right.
As far as the beaverhead goes, I know this is gonna ask you, Mike's presentation about, use on the beaverhead was way down. It's because nobody's able to guide it and outfit it effectively in August. The water conditions are so poor out there at the reservoir. No one's able to use it. Guides aren't using it. They can
No, it was
use
there in
July,
September because it went down to 27.
Yeah, and here we are running it all winter long at 23 CFS. And where's the, nobody talks about it. No one discusses it. It's not a big outcry. Oh, it's just.
And how about this question? I'll pose it a little bit differently. If you could turn the clock back to 95 to 2000, would you, we'd all do things differently, but would you be a proponent of the peak and shoulder season model, or would you cap the whole thing?
I'll be a proponent. I like how it is. I mean, it's already hard enough to get somebody to come fishing through in April. It might come one year. They have a great experience. It's great weather. Next year they come up and it snows. And it's crummy and they're supposed to go fish for 5 days and want to fish for 2.
Yes.
So, I mean, you say it's infinite shoulder season usage, and that's so not true. I mean, it's just not.
Sounds
And Eric, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I would say the exact same thing. I was kind of saying before too, is like the rivers kind of self-regulate to a point because like the Big Hole being a freestone, it's not the same river in late August that it is in May. I mean, it couldn't support the numbers that it does in May, and the amount of floatable miles decreases by 60%. And so, and then, in like what Seth's saying, from a weather standpoint, there's some years in April, we're not ice free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, that answered my questions. Thank you very much. Helpful.
Possibility.
Yeah.
Right.
One or the other.
I mean,
Ice
it's
fall,
infinite,
I
it's
like.
really phenomenal. If you look at the Big Hole, August last 3 out of 5 years, it's been food out, so we don't even go there. We run over to Madison, which is not where we want to be. It's an extra tank of gas every 3-4 days of the week, so it costs us money. It puts more pressure on the Francis and everybody over there, but we have an option. We can see, though, I get it, but I mean, it's so you call it infinite, but it's really not infinite. You can't. You could say that you could book our permanent vehicle as 194 permanent days. We use 189 or 192 every single year since we've been doing this for 9 years now.
And we're doing the same way they are, penciling every day. Okay.
Maybe
About 13 left.
April, maybe we might
Bill, you've
do.
been there. Sorry, Bill, you guys wouldn't be there.
Yeah, in reality, I mean, the more people see it, I mean, they come in May, they're like, oh, this is so incredibly up, the Big Hole's so beautiful. Next year, like, we go to Big Hole, it's like, you can go float with some logs if you want to. It's just-
Yeah,
right,
well,
it's
in
just
last
doable.
year
So
in
it's
May,
not like infinite usage in the shoulder too, that's like
we weren't able to use the other.
wrong
Right.
term.
It wasn't high enough.
Right.
Exactly, we can go up there this year.
Yeah, I mean, this is the, I mean, did you guys even float Mud Creek this year?
1 pound.
Yeah, I did it once too.
Yeah.
And that's something that I usually do 15, 20 times.
Yeah.
We just
And we
didn't have the
certainly
water.
understand there's differences between the two rivers.
For sure,
One's got a
absolutely.
reservoir, one doesn't.
Yeah.
They're much different rivers, but it was very interesting for me to hear your responses. So thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Just a comment before we cut you loose, Eric. We've got Commissioner Byworth here. I'm here. Dr. Rice is here. Really interested in your feedback on the state of the brown trout in both rivers and whether you support the new regs and the actions of the commission.
Yeah, so the state of the brown trout, it's not good. We've been in decline since the first Saprolegnia outbreak. And there's a lot of, I don't know, scientists don't know. I mean, I talked to a lot of people at the Watershed Committee meeting that we just had the other day and the Drought Subcommittee meeting, and the answer is the same. It's happening. We can see a decline, but we don't know why. And the steps that the commission took, I think, were absolutely the right things to do. It gets us the approach of, will they all help? Maybe. But if we're in a situation like this where we have such a decline, we have to try something. We have to do things. We have this spawning closure, and the revisit to change the dates for the big hole, I thought was phenomenal. I think that's exactly what needed to happen. The first one was a November start date. The spawn of the big hole is done by November. So moving it to an October 1st made a big difference, I think. And it wouldn't have made a difference this year because the river was closed in that section regardless, but going forward, I think it's going to make a difference. Catch and release for the brown trout. It just can't hurt, might help. And we're in a situation where every bit of help that we can get, we need. So I don't think we have the answers. I think we're going to continue to look for the answers. But in that time, until we can figure out exactly what's going on, every little thing that we can do to try to protect them, I think is the right thing to do.
Well, thank you very much for driving up from Victor. Safe drive home.
Happy to be here. Very helpful.
Mike, thanks for your work on this.
Thank you, Mike.
Let's take a quick 5-minute bio break and then come back and finish up.
Yeah. 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 What do you say, Scott? Yeah.
I came in from Bill. And came over the pass. I gotta go home tonight.
Well, she can have.
Tonight is all night, I would have camped there.
No, she's good. Well, he's got a guy that's down.
Dude,
I was over that today. To be honest.
Yeah. So when I get back. Yeah, what else?
I hear you saying the roads weren't bad.
Well, Four Corners, yeah, I would say are kind of legality, yeah.
Okay, because I live right at Four Corners.
Yeah, well, that was the worst.
Yeah, just closer over the year.
Yes, yeah, and of course, the hill, of course.
I gotta drive over the.
Yeah, it should, yeah, I always say 24 hours later, it's always better.
Or it's either better or worse.
Oh, yeah, I think I kind of turned it over to the foundation at that point. Yeah, it's fine. She didn't get the hospital foundation. Yeah, so we'll kind of do something like that. Rather than they reallocate the money to us. Yeah. Yeah, no. Yeah, no, that's good to know. Yeah. We definitely have different things. Yeah, I was just talking about that. It works like something else. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was snowing there, but it's not as bad. It's way icy. And we don't have to plow. Who knows? That may go back though. But yeah, it's just easier to picture. I'm not a good, I can't. It's a lot of them now. Yeah, kind of way more than that before. So, yeah. Teams. No. And people,
And so there'll be some.
Laundry, yeah. Yeah, you too.
Sorry, I didn't
So we're gonna try to do that. Exactly. I'm pretty sure that. I think we may have taken.
I said a gift certificate.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can do it all over.
My wife had.
Yep, but I appreciate it.
Sure, I'm in.
Let's move this along.
Yeah. I went across town. Sometimes when
They're not.
No, it's not.
Well, sometimes you wonder, it's the first one or you? I think she's got some late. I don't.
I'm just gonna go.
Has received.
That's your bad.
A good review. Yeah.
Yes.
Or nights a week. Yeah, instead of going to the townhouse.
Right, yes, exactly.
You too.
So what's returning on those plans for you?
They start to become a little bit every day gets better.
Yeah.
No, that's the thing.
Follow up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So the first one. The last thing. No, I think. Yeah. Well, no, I have like one more. Okay. Yeah. Like this time, rather than
Kim, hi, it's KC. If you're there, can you go ahead and tee up my PowerPoint?
You know where to find it.
I know, thank you so much.
Okay, folks. Let's call this meeting back to order and wrap her up. We got people driving back to Ennis and Helena, and I want to get everyone on the road as fast as possible. All righty. So Kim, if you can just start the show in advance, I think you can go ahead and skip over the agenda. And so I just wanted to quickly go through kind of where we are. Now, as of this meeting, we will have wrapped up our fifth meeting, and this one was largely informational, but 4 meetings to date, and Kim just clicked down for me. We established the work group objectives and rules of the road. We've got a voting mechanism now. Next one, Kim. Recommended FAS improvements and toured the FASs with FWP staff with Jay Poppy, and I'm really pleased to let the group know that we now have funding set up for approximately $150,000 per FAS, and now we need to get the plan in place this spring and just see what we can get done in the coming months. Kim, next one. Next one, we made the recommendation of the commission on the rest and rotation rule and the Reynolds Lions fishing from boats, and that's been adopted. That's taken care of. Next one, Kim. Next one, last meeting, we dedicated a big portion of our meeting to the Madison FAS ambassador pilot program, and Dave Cumline's here today. Mac Menard has volunteered to help Dave with this program. And John, okay. So that's in works. Next one. We reviewed the 2020 youth survey and the shocking surveys with Mike Duncan. I found that all very interesting and will influence where we go next. Next one, Kim. Brian McGeehan led us through a dialogue about commercial use, the peak versus shoulder. We discussed the upper versus lower use. We looked briefly at recreational use and the commercial side of things. And the next one, we reviewed some recreational use definitions, which Brian did a nice job of describing. And next slide, please. So really, what's the role of the Madison River Work Group going forward? This comes right out of the rule. The work group may develop recommendations to the commission regarding the allocation of commercial use trips to outfitters, a process to permit new outfitters on the Madison River. And I know that one, among other commissioners who are not here tonight, is a significant issue. And then the rule language to address all recreational use on the Madison. And that would be, what can we put in place to limit future recreational use, or at least monitor it more effectively. That included the arm rules we've already adjusted. And then the final thing on our list was consequences of permit violations. So in addition to this, we felt at the first meeting that a significant pinch point for use on this river were the FASs, and we've made recommendations on those. I think we're making great progress. At 2 meetings ago, we discussed fishing regulations, because one of the objectives of this group really was fish health, and Mike described, hook scoring and some other outcomes that have occurred with all the new traffic on the river. So I want to come back to that in a minute. And I would say these are the specifics that were in the ARM, but I don't feel like this work group is limited to these specifics. I think these are the have to do's. And then in addition to that, if we have other ways to benefit the river, either from a social use standpoint or for fish health, I think we should provide the commission with feedback on those. Next slide, Kim. So the next steps and outstanding work that this group really needs to focus on, as I see it, and this is open for dialogue, but I think it's pretty straightforward. A plan for recreational use limits and management, and establish commercial use limit recommendations. And the first bullet is really about non-commercial recreational use. Recommendation regarding permits for new outfitters, and then fishing regulation recommendations. I only put a question mark because Allison and I had a dialogue about this earlier in the week, where she said, what are we doing weighing in on fishing regulations? And I think, with Eileen here, we can talk about that, whether that's something the department wants feedback on from this group. We've got a talented group of people. Many of them spent a lot of time on Madison. I think it would be a shame not to at least give some kind of recommendation on that. Next slide, please. So in dialogues with various members of the group, the feeling was, hey, these are kind of meaty topics that we're about to get into that are probably too big to tackle as a group of 12 people in a meeting room during a 90 to 2 hour meeting. And that it would be helpful to assign leaders to each one of these 4 topics. And then those leaders will work with other members of the work group who are either interested or can really add value in the dialogue, then come forward to all of us with recommendations that we can discuss and make decisions on. And so, Kim, if you can just start populating this. So on the recreational use recommendations, non-commercial recreational use, I've asked Brian to lead that effort. I think through your contacts with out-of-state interests like Kristen and others, I think you're kind of the ideal person to lead that. On the commercial use recommendations, I've asked Dan Larson to lead that effort. And I'll tell you why I think it's so important to have an attorney involved. I think there are a lot of questions related to what the commission can and cannot do related to these commercial use caps, given that they are BLM permits. And I don't know what maybe it's as easy as we all think it is today, but my suspicion is it's going to be more complicated than the prior commission thought it might be, and that the current FWP staff think it might be. So I think Dan and I will be meeting with the legal staff from FWP in the next couple of weeks, and in advance of the next meeting, I think it might be very helpful to have Becky Doctor from the department come and meet with us on some of the legal ramifications of limiting commercial use. And then I think there's a question mark also about the transferability of the SRPs. So Dan's agreed to do that. I think it's great. Thank you, Dan. Next bullet. So new outfitter permits. Allison has been a little more reluctant to take this one on, but I thought it was appropriate. I know when the commission discussed your involvement with this, a lot of our interest was that you're related to a relatively new outfitter and have a perspective on new outfitters. So you're going to think about it a little bit, but I hope you'll help lead that effort. And I think it's closely related to the work that Dan's doing. Next topic is fishing rate recommendations. And Mac has agreed to do this. And given that he's the natural resource professional on the work group, I think it makes sense for Mac to lead this. And we had talked about having Mike Duncan come back. And Eileen, I think you may have some other resources within the department that you'd like to involve in this topic. So with that, I'd like to, and then the final one was the Fas Improvement Plan. And while we have some funding set aside, the FASs are no longer part of what the commission oversees, and it's really now part of the Parks Department. But we have the head of Parks is focused on this, and Jay Poppy, and now I think it's a matter of really helping them prioritize which FASs we'd like to work on, and then staying involved in the process and making sure that we keep focus on that. Next slide. River Ambassador pilots, as we talked about, Dave and John and Mac are going to be working on that. I think that holds great promise for the future. So here's something to ponder. as we think about the coming 11 months. So we've got a commission meeting date on April 21st. The next one we have is February 4th, so we're not going to be making a recommendation. We're not currently on the agenda for that. But for the commission meeting on April 21st, we'll need to make our recommendation about 30 days in advance of that. So it's a mid to late March. This group's going to need to have a meeting and bring forward a recommendation. That then goes to the Secretary of State for notice. And I will put this up on the team's website. But that then goes to the Secretary of State. Once that notice is filed, public comment would be expected to begin about May 13th. And then the commission would then have the advantage of having the public comment and take final action on the recommendation in the June 23rd meeting. So, we got it. The rubber really has to start hitting the road. June 23rd meeting, the commission could consider another recommendation from this group. Again, that would have to be built into the agenda around the end of May. Notice, and then public comment would wrap up on July 8th. There's a longer period of time then. We wouldn't take that up for final adoption until the August 25th meeting. And then same routine again here on the August 25th meeting. This group will have to make a recommendation by the probably 25th or so of July. Goes out for public comment, and that wouldn't get agreed to by the commissioner, voted on until the October 27th meeting. And then on the last date, if we make a recommendation in the October meeting, that's really not gonna impact 2023. And so the decision was made at our meeting, gosh, I think it was in June, that we would use the work group to make recommendations, at least on the commercial side, commercial outfitter use for the 2023 season. So we're really going to need to hit one of these three meetings with our final recommendation. Next slide, Kim. So here is one, possible viewpoint. And part of this is, I think this one's relatively straightforward, Mac. I think it's possible this group would be able to get the fishing rig recommendations probably in one meeting and consider that at, let's say, a mid-March meeting of the work group, make the recommendation. I know you, Eileen, you told me that if we are going to weigh in fishing regs, you'd like it earlier in the year.
We take our fishing regs to the commission in August. So my preference would be to do all fishing regs at the one commission meeting rather than split them up. So that's when I take the proposal and then we final in October.
But we'd have to be out for public comment, correct?
We would go out for public comment after the August meeting.
Oh, you would?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that really changes things. Yeah. So this could, but
yeah,
I know when you and I
my preference would be for you to take regulations at the August meeting, but I'm taking the rest of them.
Yeah, but when you and I spoke on the phone, you'd prefer to get this done before your staff gets into the season.
Yeah, in terms of how, I wasn't sure if those meetings were your commission meeting dates or this meeting date. So in terms of this group doing it, yes, I think having the field staff come and talk earlier would be better, but still shooting for a proposal at the August meeting.
Okay, that's fine. I understand that.
Yeah, once we get into May, it's hard with field staff. So but we can make it happen. So but the fishing regs in terms of going to the commission, my preference is taking them at the August meeting, just to keep our whole package together.
So I'll just make a quick comment. I think, like I did on the Big Hole in Beaverhead, that to have a 5-fish bag limit in the lower Madison, given the struggles of our brown trout in the river right now, just seems nuts to me. And I would like the work group to weigh in on that. Mac, I asked you to think about a few comments on whether you think the work group should make recommendations on fishing regs.
Yeah, I mean, it's beyond the scope of what was put into our formal charge. That said, we are looking at building a model that would be transportable theoretically across the state. And part of that means it carries with it the implication that the Madison River is a special management water. And that's what we're doing. We're doing something unique here, something special. We're mimicking, a model to some extent. Well, given that it's a special management water, and thinking back in part to what Eric said about the brown trout regulations that we put in as a conservation measure on Beaverhead, Big Hole, why would we wait to adopt a policy of conservative wild stock management for any one of these special management waters? So I think it fits beautifully into a messaging that the public takes and says, by the way, this has got conservative regulations on it. These regulations weren't essential at the moment, and we're not in a biological collapse, but it is absolutely consistent with the policy of conservative wild stock management, which is why we're focused on things like the Madison. So what would that look like? It could be a suite of relatively conservative regulations. Single hook only, artificial lures. It could be catch and release only. It could be prescribed spawning ground closures where it's appropriate, timeframes, that type of thing. And you would have some basis on which to do that. It wouldn't just be some random thing because you've adopted sort of this overarching policy of conservative wild stock management whose goal is to maintain historic size and age composition within the fishery. I mean, those are the things that we put down on paper, and then we build regulations to ensure that to the best of our ability that it's happening. And the benefit of that is, in my mind, is public communication. We're now saying that this is something extraordinary. This is something better. And we didn't have to wait till it collapsed. It's okay to say in a special management water, conservative wild stock management approach, it's okay to catch and release, even though it hasn't collapsed. It's a message thing. So I think there's value to it. It's not the most important thing necessarily we're doing, but it certainly fits, I think, nicely with the overall theme. We're talking about a special management water at the end of the day. That's what we're doing. Creating something special. We're not waiting for it to collapse. We're going to act now. That's it. That would be my pitch.
Brett, any comments from the group?
Is there, like on the fishing regs, there has to be some coordination with the state, because you guys are developing management plans for.
Well, we can talk more offline to save time, but I've mentioned this before. We have a statewide fisheries management plan, and we're currently going through a review and revision of that. What you're talking about, Mac, in terms of a conservative wild stock management policy, that would be something we would write into the management plan.
Yep.
The way the and sorry, I should let Commissioner Byworth talk, since I'm pretty sure you were on the commission the last time the plan was approved. The purpose if you want, Commissioner, the purpose of the plan is to inform things like regulations. So for something like you're talking about, Mac, and to get to Mike's comment, is my suggestion would that should be incorporated into the statewide fisheries management plan, which will be going to the commission as a proposal probably later this year. We have to have it legislatively out for the public by January. We're legislatively mandated to do it now. So that is on the cycle with our 4-year cycle for regulations. Regulations this year are off cycle, so that's why it wouldn't match up. But for something like you're talking about, that language should be in that management plan. That wouldn't be finalized till early next year.
I think that timeframe is fine, right? I mean, it is, usually you'd establish policy first and act on regulations.
Exactly,
second.
and that's our purpose of the
But
plan.
I think we could have, and I do think this is a worthy group to help frame, that kind of
Well,
assistance.
and that management plan, so we're getting onto a 4-year cycle with it. Previously, it's been 7 or 8 year cycle. We're doing it more often now. There's an extensive public process involved with that, and for various reasons, Eric and I are behind schedule on it. We probably should have started last year, but we didn't, but we're starting now. This summer, there'll be, we'll take it out on the road, we'll do the road show. But it's a huge process. The Madison is a tiny part of that. But it would be a good place for this group to influence that, knowing that plan will be presented to the commission by the department, and the Madison portion, or the conservative well-stock management, if it was going to be broader than the Madison, would be part of that plan. And then that's used to influence regulations.
And the only exception to that would be a conservation related kind of emergency case, which.
Yeah, we can still do regulations this year. It's just the what comes first, the policy or the regs. We always like the policy to come first, but we're certainly justified by doing a regulation change during the off-cycle year like we spoke about. But I think for something like Mike's talking about, it should be in the management plan, which then also goes out for broader input, which I would recommend if you're thinking about taking this broader than just the Madison. Because you can involve the public more.
Yeah, I mean, we can flesh that out and see if it fits the vision that I think most people would have. I'll make the assumption is that this isn't the only river that will have some restriction on use downrange. It's logical. People are already talking about the other rivers. In fact, there's actually. So it would be nice to know how we're establishing or selecting those waters for special management, because it's not right now. We haven't waited until we had a biological crash. We're trying to avert that, maintain some level of quality. So those are good policy statements that maybe we can read. It's up to you guys.
The only thing I'd add is a la carte fishing regulations are going to see endangered. And we already see that in the big or the beaverhead, where we changed the regulations on brown trout to respond to a perception of a crisis. Well, now we have a petition for rulemaking before the commission that must be addressed within 60 days to reverse that, based on the conservation district and the people that live around the Beaverhead River. So when you do it a la carte, or if this body wants to develop a recommendation, I welcome it. But to exclude the public from that process and creates the illusion that somehow the Madison isn't a special or is a sacrifice area now and it's going to crash unless we put on these regulations isn't actually the case.
I don't think.
We don't have sacrifice areas in Montana.
Yeah, so I didn't say that.
No, but the implication is that, we've got to manage the Madison special before it crashes.
Correct.
In the public eye is a whole different perception. The perception there is, well, if the Madison's special, why don't we do this here? Well, we already manage the population biologically, just like every street. It's based on population dynamics. So the idea that this special regulation is a must to show that Madison's special would be a surprise to everybody that the Madison isn't already special. So that's my caution. I think it's important to have a good dialogue and develop some management recommendations that influence the state management plan. But marching in and requesting special regulations before it crashes is creates a public perception that's just going to end up very messy, just like it does on the Beaverhead.
God, I think that's a great time to kind of remind folks who are listening in or the public tonight that this is really a powerless group. right? The work group is only here to give some high-level recommendations to the commission. Those recommendations may or may not be adopted by the commission. Pat will be there in the commission meeting. Then if they are adopted, they go out for a 30-day public comment period. And that would really be the time for folks to get online and voice their opinion on whatever of these 4 issues that we're talking about. So, Allison?
I just want to explain where I was coming from and questioning it. First of all, we had the 4 things that we were tasked to do. So I appreciate that you recognize that was not one of the 4 things. I feel a strong sense of urgency about the recreation plan, about the non-commercial use. And I feel when we start focusing on stuff that's already being managed by Fish and Wildlife that was not tasked to us, we're going to miss the boat of something that's very important for this group. It's not going to be easy. The non-commercial is the elephant in the room. It's going to be the more controversial than the commercial. And we have got to spend time. And I feel stressed that we aren't putting something into place to start gathering numbers on non-commercial use this year. Because then that just kicks that one down like one more time. And we cannot put regulations into a commercial plan without really moving forward with a non-commercial plan. That is not right. That is not what we were tasked to do. So I worry that our energy is going in the wrong direction of something that wasn't tasked to this group. That is why I questioned Commissioner Walsh on that. And that's where I'm coming from. I will work with the group, but I do feel we cannot derail. It's actually not that much time when you look at the task of really understanding recreation use. So that's where I'm coming from there. And we have a lot of nuts and bolts that we have not even come to a recommendation for what we were tasked for commercial use. So that is why I pushed back on it.
So Allison, just so I'm following, you're expressing a preference against even going down the fishing regs rabbit hole.
Until we've done these other things.
Yes. Because I don't think, I respect Mac and that we have to look at the big picture and understand that isn't really what we are tasked to do. I think we have a powerful voice, but I feel the other 2 are more pressing today.
I've responded that you could say the same thing about the FAS and master program. But I think we just established in the public eye an incredibly powerful and arguably a successful vision that we're moving forward. And I kind of see this as I certainly think you're correct 100% about what the elephant is, what the next one is. I agree with you. And we've got to get that right. But I think a few small wins in our win column is helpful. And I would view this as a discussion to put us there. I don't suggest we derail anything. It's not the answer. But I would suggest for a moment, if you had such a policy in place, there would be less question as to why you have to do this on this river or why you have to do it somewhere else. Because as Commissioner Byron mentioned, we haven't crashed. So are we going to wait until it does crash? Or are we going to take proactive steps and be in a conservative mode, which is kind of what we're doing when we decide to regulate public use. We haven't crashed it, but we are going to enter headlong into the waters of regulated public use. And we don't even know what the management objective really is. We just know we're going to do it. So this approach creates that that policy statement that causes you to say, hey, this river qualifies for special use, special management, some form of different regulation, because you sure as heck can't argue that this is the normal regulation when we regulate public and commercial use. That's what I'm. Dr. Rex.
It might be helpful. So to say there isn't a management objective in place is pure and simply inaccurate. So there is.
It?
What's that?
What is it?
Well, it's in the statewide fisheries management
What is
plan.
it?
It's 500 pages long. You want me to remember every word?
Don't read it.
If we had our biologist or fish manager here, he'd be able to tell you.
Right.
So what I was gonna suggest though is, to Allison's point, this stuff is happening and there's opportunities for this group to engage, whether you take meeting time up or not. What I would suggest is everyone look at the current management plan and see what it stays there under the Madison. And I know Kim is listening. We'll have Kim put the statewide fisheries management plan up on your team's page.
Well, really just the Madison portion of it.
No, you'll get the whole 500 pages if you look at it. We can't separate it out. I normally bring it with me, but it's too heavy in my backpack on crutches, so I took it out. But what I was gonna say was I would recommend everyone look at that to see what's in place right now. And then as the department goes through this, to Allison's point, if the group doesn't want to take up time to dedicate to working on fishing regs, there's plenty of opportunity for you as individuals to participate in that process, both through the management plan and regulations. We do regulations every year in the same cycle, and they're always open for public comment. So I threw that out so that you're aware of all the options that are on the table. And as I've mentioned, the management plan is an open process, and you'll be so sick of hearing about it by the end of the year. So it's, but there is a plan in place, and there is an objective for the Madison as there is for all of our waters.
And I was just moved by, what we heard from Mike Duncan at the meeting. It did sound like the brown trout were crashing in the lower river. And we did hear that 28% of the fish in the upper have hook scoring. Mike?
I support strongly what Allison pointed out. I don't think these tasks are necessarily mutually exclusive, but we spent an inordinate amount of time so far on cruising around FASs and talking about that. Tonight was the first night we mentioned or even started to discuss outfitter new entry, and that's one of our tasks. So following that, the idea, is let's take our priority task first, and then extra time to provide additional input into a plan that's already being drafted by Fish, Wildlife and Parks. It's not taking away the importance or the implementation of perhaps new fishing regs, but we already have people working on that. We don't have anybody working on a plan for new outfitters or a plan for non-commercial rec users, or what happens with permit violations, or should we use an appellate time? We only have till June to get these things cranking for the January 23 implementation date.
One answer might be, if possible, that we take advantage of these seasons when we're not out outfitting and guiding, and step up a few more meetings.
Yeah.
I
was going to suggest that.
And then, I can't let it go by. I presume that the group leader from the commercial uses, we're all gonna be in meetings on Friday, let's meet kind of thing. The new entry outfitter, the person that was dealing with the new entry outfitting, the public person who's attorney to work on a commercial use plan. Frankly, I was confused by that selection, but I'm ready to. Whatever you
I would
need.
expect no less. No, and let me just address maybe your concern directly about the process. I envision, at least the work group that I would be working with would be to be probably tapping out 4 or 5 members with very distinct interests and expertise in this area. And my job is to sort of help steer it and direct it into some recommendations we can bring back to the entire group. And There are some technical aspects that are popping up a little bit more is because of both BLM and FWP regulations and where do they all cross that we can work through. But it would be a very collaborative process.
Okay, it's just an organizer of time.
Yeah, mediator, moderator, coordinator.
And I think on the recreational use plan, it's not exactly clear to me today whether that's gonna have to go through the legislature in the next session or what we can and can't do. Department already told me that we can't charge fees without going to the legislature, so I think, again, this is a pretty powerless group. We're gonna make recommendations to the commission, and there may be some issues that the commission really can't vote on.
I agree with that. I don't think we're powerless. We're the ones selected to.
Well, right, but just so the public knows, we're not gonna be implementing anything. And the commission, there's some, great minds on the commission, and the commission may or may not adopt the recommendations of this group. And it's, some issues are gonna be more political than others, and there's gonna be a very lively public comment.
Well, we already engaged in that. It's not through the rest of the rotation.
Yeah, right.
One thought in terms of timing, and I have no problem investing time, the work group investing time in fishing regulations. I especially like the idea of thinking beyond the Madison. There's a lot of wisdom in that. I do feel a lot of pressure in the recreation planning side of things, both commercial and non-commercial. And in terms of elevating what's the highest priority, I would elevate those. And the thought there is, as every month goes by, more people move to Montana. As every year goes by without having all the details of the commercial plan, there's right now, we have some guidance in the outfitting world, but we don't have guidance on how someone can grow at the moment, right? If we're going to be capped out, and so we don't have any transferability things worked out, and so those are really important. And if we have limited time, I think there's some wisdom in making sure, and they're going to take a lot of time to flesh out, but those are elevated. And we have a 3-year commitment here, and if the fishing regs have to get pushed back 4 or 5 months to review, trout die young. And so if we're going to change fishing regs, the fish will respond to that within a year or two, those improvements, if we make them. It's really hard, it's really hard to go backwards in time in terms of population growth and commercial use. So there's some pressure there. But also on the new entry, that's going to dovetail really closely with the commercial use. So, I think there should be a lot of collaboration there. And I also think, at the end of the day, Matt, who works with a lot of outfitters and guides, and Mike, who represents a lot of outfitter guides, it's really critical that you two are participating in that commercial side. I just don't see something being successful if there's not some relation. Yeah.
I
Okay,
also
then.
think it's possible that we could come back to the group with a couple of alternatives that have been fleshed out and kind of work down there. Doesn't mean we've necessarily reached an absolute consensus, but we've hopefully fleshed out details a little more.
I like that point. I agree with that too, Dan. I think if there might be 4 or 5 folks kind of working on it, there might be not a consensus, but when it comes back to us as a larger group, if we have 2 things to kind of look at, that's a little firmed up.
And you've
It's
got
easier.
80-90% of the stuff. Here's a consensus. Here's the 10 or 15% that we still need to pound through.
May well go to the commission at that form too.
Good.
Yeah, Zach.
You mentioned that some level of the non-commercial regulation ideas that have to go through the legislature to ever
Yeah, the one I heard, the specific one I talked to Dustin Temple about was whether or not the Fish and Wildlife Commission could implement a, say, $15 per day float pass fee
For non-commercial.
for non-commercial use. And the answer to me was no. But that would have to go through the legislature.
We should get that around in the NRC. And my recollection is that the theme park was a non-issue.
We can wish, we can hope. We're not attorneys, and that's why I've asked Dan to help with this stuff, because I think, Dustin knows, right, Eileen, what's
Typically,
gonna work.
typically, most fees are authorized through the legislature. But the mechanism doesn't have to go through the legislature.
It's also not clear to me, Mike, that the Madison River SRPs will fit under the SB 275, which I think will really change things. Okay. So I think that's one of the early issues that I asked Dan to take a look at what the department legal said.
Because of the BLM.
Right.
I guess I just throw out there that understanding that those boundaries in that playing field sooner rather than later.
Exactly.
Really important. And if part of the timeline that you list out is having a proposal ready for the 2023 legislature and starting to gather non-commercial use data during that season hinges on the legislature cooperating, that's a huge thing that I hadn't even thought of. That is, I served on PLPW for 6 years when I was a legislator, and coming to consensus in that group and then translating that consensus into anything that had a chance in hell in the legislature, it is not easy to do.
Right.
It's a heavy lift, and engaging with key legislators probably from Madison County.
Probably similar timeline too, right? We want to be really going by August.
Yeah, and you'd want to have those people in the real world participating with us so that they're bought in and understand the background and have the fluency with what we're talking about. I'm not using my words correctly, but they're fluent enough with what we're talking about that they could actually effectively in the legislature.
Okay, let's try to nail some dates. Currently, we have a meeting scheduled for February 24th. Everyone's good with that date?
Yep.
That one's iced in. Let's think about what we want the content of that meeting to be.
Is it February 4th?
24th. And we'll get FWP staff to send out meeting invitations for these once we nail them down. Kim, I think on the next slide, I had some, I started this. So to John's point, while folks aren't outfitting, what's the cadence going to be going forward? And what would be helpful? And I've got a bad date here. This should have been February 24th, and we'll change that around. I'm really persuaded by the dialogue tonight that we ought to at least start focusing in on these bigger topics first.
I think there's merit on the commercial part because it's very accurate. We're feeling it this week. It's like ramping up and the phones are ringing and we're feeling a lot of time pressure. And that only goes into hyperdrive as we get, we're less than 90 days away from our spring season opening.
Right.
And so I think there's some value in focusing some significant time on the commercial use side. If the folks that are going to get really involved in that, and we can bring
Like the bigger lift is going to be this one.
Yeah, that's the
And to Zach's point, that's going to maybe have.
But at the same time, that may not be ready to be implemented in 2023, or the fully, maybe the first step of it. That's going to be a longer process, both to develop, but also even if something's agreed upon, there may be some legislative acts that we might need to recommend fee structures, but
The
We should begin that process, but in terms of carving out time for the February meeting and discussion, I would argue that commercial use. Priority number one.
It's 2023, it's expected that,
And it gets more and more complicated the longer we go without having something with firm recommendations.
yes.
Just my thoughts here about collecting some others' input here, but I see somewhat of an iterative process for us, and setting aside, like an hour's worth of time at the February 24th meeting for an update presentation, and maybe we focused on a couple of key issues that help drive the next level of detail, and anticipate that we'll need 2 or 3 meetings over the next several, perhaps if we're doing them monthly, that we can have an hour at each one of those meetings to continue to refine things. And I would anticipate meeting outside of that to work on this, but then bringing it all back with a focused discussion on a couple of points each time that allow us to then move to the next level. But I don't envision us just coming back in 30 or 60 days with, here's the program.
Yeah, I don't either.
No.
Do you think we could do a meeting between now and the 24th of February that would be of value, or should we?
No.
Yeah.
Because I think we're going to probably try to get the legal beagles,
Right.
some discussion. I'd like to start getting a sort of a smaller work group together and be able to get some drafts of some ideas out for us. And then by February 24th, have a more focused discussion here. And then we'll continue that over the next several months.
Well, it's fun to make the main substance of the 24th meeting the commercial use topic, and then if Kristen can join us for 20 minutes. So great.
I just think, keep your perspective that going to try to take us in sort of steps.
I understand totally. I think that makes total sense.
Well, we do need an answer on the transferability.
We'll figure that out before the 24th.
Because that will impact
Everything.
I think that like the entry should follow that, because we can't really, we can start coming with ideas, but it's hard to know what to work with.
And the same thing, I would hope that by the meeting on the 24th, we have a better sense of what's going to have to come to the legislature, what levels we work with.
And I will send you some of the SRP federal handbook that governs SRPs. I can get that to you. I'll also send you some of the Smith River permitting. On the Smith River, there's 2 permits. So there's federal permits, which govern fees that get paid for a service, and then there's a state permit, which governs limits on trips. So that might be a source of some questions to ask the state.
Let's talk about the next meeting. So moving into March, I'd say the week of the 14th or 21st. Especially when
I just have something bouncing through my head. I mean, I'd be more than willing to make my lodge available if we wanted to do. A lot of these people in this room are from Ennis. Those that aren't, the lodge is big enough to provide single occupancy accommodations. We have the cooks come in and cook for everybody and like spend, 4 hours in the afternoon on, and then everybody have dinner together and invite the public in for public comment. Next morning, wake up, have breakfast and another 4 hours of meeting, and really pack in a bunch of time. It's just, it certainly is something I would be more than happy to make available if people thought that would be efficient.
Yeah, I just want to make sure duration is what we need, right? Because I think we're going to be collecting information between now and the 24th.
Sure.
Getting answers. I think there might be a point in time when that would be beneficial.
Yeah, these long negotiations that come out of this, I would guess.
Right.
Casey, the spring break for the college and the local schools is the 12th of March. Yeah.
That week.
So I know.
Would we want to meet? I mean, we'll be meeting just a couple of weeks before then. We could meet say the 10th of March.
That works.
That's not good.
No.
Earlier than that night? What's your blackout there?
8, 9, and 10.
Casey,
That's getting pretty close.
2
to
weeks
it.
is a pretty short time for what I envision the group, continue to work on. But what about the week of the March 21st? We're after the spring break.
I would make one additional, like, there'll be some other things happening in parallel, right? So, and so having another meeting, like even 2 weeks later.
Just don't want it to all be a focus on the commercial part of it.
Right, but there'll probably be some other parts, like the non-commercial, maybe some initial things that, I don't know. I'm just thinking of the time pressure. It's gonna be more and more difficult to have frequent meetings as you get into as we get busy.
The whole week.
I could be available the spring break week, I just Zoom in.
I mean, I don't think it's gonna make sense to meet a week away.
The more meetings we have, the better.
What would be the topic, John? If we met?
Well, I mean, just tonight, for example, these presentations are so valuable. We're still learning. It seems like we're not even to the place yet where we can start negotiating amongst each other. Yeah, good point. I mean, I think we need to tackle the commercial aspect of our plan right now. And then move to the non-commercial right away. And those are both take a really long time. Well, commercial less time than the non-commercial. But they're both going to be hot topics, lots of negotiation, lots of different opinions.
How about back to the week of the 21st of March? Who else? Any other conflicts that week? Good week.
24th. Jim,
March.
you-
No, it's in Zoom.
The
but
21st of March.
We'll record it. I mean, would you be around the 24th of March?
I'll be gone that whole week.
The whole week, yeah.
Can you Zoom in? I might be able to.
Right, probably maybe gone, but I can zoom in.
I'm good anytime that week. Me too.
Let's pick March 24th, if that works, Thursday night.
Same time, 5:30.
5:30, yeah. And then I hope we can take John up on his idea.
Well, if we get to that place and we want to lock ourselves in rooms and not come out until it's decided. The bar's going to be open.
That's good, the bar.
You don't want to come out.
Let the negotiations start.
How about, how's April 21st for everyone? March 24th.
What week is that?
I would say we should
That's
go.
a Thursday.
Yeah.
I almost say 2 weeks after that, because April's gonna start to get
Okay.
Is it April?
How about April 14th?
7. Just 2 weeks after, but
That was tough for me.
14th is good. 14th.
Any day that week, Mike?
12.
Yeah. 11 through 15, 10 through 15.
April 21st.
I can,
You can make it.
the Orvis retreat.
How about the day before the 20th?
It starts that night.
Okay. We've got a commission meeting on the 19th.
What about the week of the 3rd?
Somebody said the 7th. though. It could be.
You guys are that night.
Okay, well, it's 7th, you all get birthday presents.
I'm really jammed up that week. 14th,
Nothing that week,
can you call in?
probably not.
21st.
Yeah, 21, 21.
You're out.
Oh,
That's
that's,
May, my daughter's I'm with my daughter in Florida at a competition, so if she's not competing, I can zoom in, but it's gonna be
say May or April? We're still.
We're in April, we're trying to find a date in April.
Anything in that, earlier in that week, 18th, 19th, or what you said?
Probably Pat and I have a commission meeting on the 19th, and that usually plays into the 18th.
And when's the meeting before April? March
March
24th.
24th.
About April 28th. Late, but.
28th works for me, April 28th.
Something else we can.
Expect the work groups to meet in between these meetings.
So the decision's 28th.
28th of April.
Okay.
Now, May, how about May? Given how late that one is, how about May 12th?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd say May 12th or 19th. Let's go earlier.
I think the 12th isn't. 19th will work.
About the 10th.
10th will work.
And I'm fine with May 10th. Rest of the group.
I don't want like 2 trips in that. Let's do it.
Where are we in May?
May 10th,
May 10th?
going once.
Good. Or 2 weeks.
Did we fit another meeting in May?
Sure. May 10th is the date.
That's the first date in May.
Don't we have to probably be going to the commission with our recommendations by like May 20th or something, a month before?
To get on the agenda, yeah. 26th would be probably the outside date based on the dialogue I had today.
Should we just,
I can't do the last week of May.
Which one? The 30th or the May 26th?
The 20th, the week of the 20th.
Throw out it'd be, 10 days later, but like the 19th or.
I can do the 19th.
Yeah, we can always cancel it.
Yeah, if we don't need to, if we made lots of progress.
We're already done. 19th works for me.
Shed all the blood we need to.
Come on now. We declare victory. I know June's gonna be difficult for everyone, but let's just pick a date now.
Are we writing down the 19th, Casey?
Yep, 19th, 10th and 19th, so 9 days apart.
Any chance we can do it the 18th?
I got a out of state board meeting. Move to June. I mean, the other thing is we could meet a week later if we need it. Just pencil in the 26th. That would still be the Hail Mary for the June 23rd.
And by that time, we're gonna have a lot of time to flesh the, I think we're ready to do a lot of heavy lifting by that point.
It should be behind us.
26 works for me.
Okay. May 26th.
26, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, at that point, we'll just be doing fishing. And what?
Yeah. Double max, double run.
3 days on that.
I hope we can cancel several.
Yeah, hopefully we won't need it.
Make sure I have them all. The 10th, the 19th, the 26th.
Right.
Can you send out an email
I will.
after this?
Yeah, let me read them all out and make sure we've got them all. February 24th, March 24th, April 28th, May 10th, May 19th, which is my anniversary, so I'd much rather spend it with all of you. May 26th. And do you want me to just schedule those for the 5:30 all here and we can change
Sure.
if needed?
It's fine.
Okay.
How's June 16th? Everyone loves it.
We'll be so sick of each other.
Again, this is a, tentative. I just want to put it on your calendar. 16. Okay. That's all I have. Let's open this up for public comment.
Mike Bias's presentation, can it be found on the internet by the public?
It's already on.
It's on the,
It should be on the website already.
Okay.
Kim was gonna do it tonight.
all right, good. Personally, the implementation of this new law, that's 3747, partial sale, it impacts me personally, and I wonder when we're gonna decide to give the agencies the information they need to proceed in the using that law. I'm interested in acquiring and selling, and I can't do anything. So we do something about that. You can't do, the agency can't do anything. So I'm personally very interested in that. And then lastly, congratulations on the FAS funding. That's a big deal. That's the, I'm curious how that was done. Where's the, who made the decision, where's the funds from?
The department.
Department funding?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. The, isn't gonna solve the problem of crowding, but it's gonna address some of these other issues that we knew influences the user experience. I think that's a big deal. So how many FAS times 150,000? How many each?
All.
That is how many.
But I mean, it's not a function of how many they can get. It's gonna be, we'll need a plan and we'll have
Gotcha.
to get
Okay.
implemented.
All right.
And is that just isolated?
And I guess what I'd ask John to do is prioritize. He's already done that.
We did Lions already. And it's.
Yeah, the alliance would be different, right? This is a deal. So.
But we did prioritization the same as when we did that.
It was very similar.
Yeah.
I'm done.
And thanks, Dave. Any other public comments?
If I may interrupt the public comment, David, congratulations on being.
Hall of
Oh,
Fame.
yeah, sure. All right.
And fun for a chief out in Wisconsin to be inducted into the hall, which is in Headwaters, Wisconsin, where I've been must be flat. Yeah, it was pretty cool. I had no idea that had been done. And I read the story in the blog on the TU website that Chris Wood has been inducted in the last paragraph that said, you know, I had no idea. It was kind of actually a cool way to find out about it. Thank you.
Any other public comment tonight? Todd?
I'd just like to really encourage you guys as we're going through this. I heard Mr. Sampson referred to something a few meetings back when I was watching the live streams as far as pushing up against what we think might be the limitations of what the river can hold, the amount of use. When are we at that tipping point? What is the amount of commercial use that we can push the Madison River to that is sustainable? Do we want to push up against it? Or do we want to, in fear of finding out what's beyond that wall, of after it? Or do we want to stop short of what is sustainable to affect the river? I mean, we're looking at a number, if we take that number, it's over 16,000. You guys all saw what the numbers are on the Bighorn Beaverhead. I mean, that's two rivers. Granted, they're each one of these rivers is unique, but that's two rivers. The use on the Madison is more than both of those rivers combined, much more than both of those rivers combined. I just, man, when you guys are going through this process, really think about what is sustainable for the Madison River as far as what commercial use is, because then you're going to have to address this thing called Bozeman coming over the Madison on the non-commercial use after we get done with the commercial use. It's
Todd, how do you think, we love input. How do you think is a good way to ascertain what that number is?
I don't know that there is a good way, John, but I'll tell you what I do think is I do think that each of us probably have a number in our gut of where we feel we're pushing up against too many commercial trips and we're pounding that river. We're loving that river to death. And if the river's gone, what is left? So I just really encourage everybody to keep the resource heavy on your mind of what we think that thing will withstand. And I wish there was some magic way to find that number. I don't know that even the biologists have that number, but I'll tell you one thing that I do know is the biologists have a gut feeling of what's going on. And instead of being persecuted for giving their gut feeling about what they think, maybe we should listen to biologists' gut feeling from what we have passed. I leave it right there.
Thank you. Yeah, well said.
So kind of a follow-up question, your own perception, biology, but also just experience from all your years in the river, where are you at personally in terms of a threshold for not just commercial use, but not commercial use?
I think we're overusing the river. I think that number of 16,000 is too much. And I think that we're overusing the river, and I really would like to see a really good entry point for local young people to get involved who want to be an RUP holder on the Madison River. I think that's very important, that the tradition continues and other people have the same opportunity. Well, it would never be the same, but at least have an opportunity. So they can be as fortunate and lucky as I was to be able to be an operator on the Madison River. But yeah, I do. I think it's too much, and especially when we're having these drought years. And that's what triggered me to kind of go, man, what is the sustainability of too much commercial use on the Madison River? You take a look at these drought years. There's so much to Madison's a different creature than all the other ones, because where does everybody go when their river isn't strong? They go to the beast known as the Madison River. It can handle all of it. It can handle the beaverhead, the big hole. I mean, I know what's going on when these guys don't have anything to fish on the beaverhead, the big hole. So yeah, man, of course you got to be open here, no problem. And Madison will open some open arms, send some more fish, it's all good. But you have to consider that when we have drought years, not only is the Madison River in drought, but we've got even more pressure coming over from the big hole and the beaverhead. It's adding to the situation. I know Casey and I talked about that with the hoot owl regulations this year. That was one of the big players why they felt it important to put the hoot owl on the Madison, is because the Madison was going to get hit, if I'm correct.
Yeah, you're correct.
By all these other rivers too. So it's a compounding problem with this drought. Not only is the low water in the Madison, but it's getting all the pressure from all the other rivers too. Yeah, it's something I really hope we keep in mind.
Thanks. All right. Any other, John?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% with what you said. That's the Madison River Foundation is all about. I may be off base, but just the part of, Allison touching about the responsibilities, of course, we have them up on the screen, big portion, and I think probably 90% of why this working group was put together was to resolve the crowding and the conflict that is happening on the Madison. And that's what was in the EA, that's what was put forward in the rec plan and the proposals and petitions. So I would just admonish you to continue to consider that, but not forgetting the resource, like so well spoken by Todd, in regards to the regulations and to changing what fishing rules are and regs are down the road. I mean, Eileen and others from FWP had a fantastic group meeting on the 21st of July to discuss those regulation changes and those proposals for brown trout. A lot of really good stuff came out of there. Not a lot of that ended up on the floor with the commission for consideration for those changes. But I would, on behalf of the working group, recommend that something similar was brought up again for regulations this year. If there's an outside working group and you pull the players that you want to be involved, that you think give the best pieces of information and data and work on that outside of the working group, so they don't feel the pressure to have that, and then maybe have that reported back to the working group so they know what is happening with regulation change for consideration rules and delineations when it comes to those things. So I thought it was a great, great roundtable meeting that was held over in June, July. And I think a lot of great discussions were had because they had all the biologist information and the watershed managers' points of view. So that's how I would solve that problem if I was in this working group, is I would defer to FWP to create another group specifically for those regulations as they relate to the Madison, which I would think any one of you could possibly or more be a part of that group in that discussion, but not to take it from what we're doing here. I think what we're doing here is very important. And again, it goes to that recreation carrying capacity of this resource. And I think she's nervously and anxiously awaiting that spring and summer is going to bring her this year. So that's what I got.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. And Kim, thanks for your help tonight. Thanks to everyone who tuned in on the live stream. Drive safe.
Thanks, everyone.